An architect is not a landscape architect.
When value engineering happens, what is usually the first casualty?
Outside starts to get cut. And there's where the big problems happen. All the houses are getting closer together. So where are you meant to put street trees?
And when landscape comes in late then, what are the consequences?
Well, you're left with the scraps, which is very frustrating.
Hello and welcome to Create and Construct, the podcast. I'm Michelle and today we are stepping into the world of landscape, not just how it looks, but how it actually performs. We are talking about sustainability, planning realities, construction pressures, and what really happens between design intent and delivery on site. Joining me today is Jane McCorkell, an award-winning landscape architect and horticultural consultant based in County Meath, with over 25 years' experience across public realm and private projects throughout Ireland. Jane is known for creating landscapes that don't just look beautiful on day one, but are designed to work with their environment for the long term, balancing aesthetics, functionality, and environmental responsibility. And when she's not shaping outdoor spaces, she's usually out enjoying them, cycling, skiing, or travelling in her motorhome, often with her dog Blondie close by. Jane, great to have you on the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Good. How is Blondie?
Oh, she's great. She's a bit put out because she's not at work with me today, but sure, look.
We
anyway.
love an office dog here.
Yeah.
We usually have Toby, David, our owner's dog. He normally comes to the office, but I haven't seen him in a while, actually.
Yeah, everybody should have an office dog. It's always good to remind yourself that life is better if you're a dog.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, 25 years. I'm sure you've seen a few planning applications come and go in that time.
Yeah.
Can you take us back? How did you get started in landscape architecture?
Okay, well, I started in horticulture first because I just wanted to work outside. I didn't want to be stuck in an office. I wanted to be outside in the fresh air, working away, and that's where I started. And then, and I really enjoyed that. And then I went back and I did landscape architecture because I was more interested in how we shape or create spaces for people and for everybody to enjoy it. Yeah, so that's why I went into landscape architecture. So yeah, it's been a very changing world that we live in from when I started it 25 years ago, and actually longer.
I was going to say, what have you noticed has changed in that time, and maybe frustratingly, what has stayed the same?
What has changed and what has stayed the same? Well, things that have changed is that everybody always underestimates things like the sentence, I want low maintenance. I don't want any maintenance. That has never changed. And people's expectations, they haven't really changed because they were never very high in the first place, I think sometimes. There's a bit of a lack of understanding, and I think people have even less time now than they ever used to have. And it really depends on which part of the industry you're talking about, which has changed the most and which hasn't. So domestically, has it changed much? People are all into their outdoor living spaces for having extra rooms. Commercially, things have changed because we need to be a little bit more responsible with our outdoor spaces. We need to be able to work together better, and this concept of green infrastructure. So that's the big change.
Do you feel that landscape architecture is treated as finishing touches rather than infrastructure?
Not anymore.
No,
not anymore. It has completely changed in terms of that. You know, when I started out, it was sort of the afterthought, and there was always a big drive to try and, at the beginning of every project, that a landscape architect should be part of the team. And an architect is not a landscape architect. And it's very evident when you look at schemes from previous generations. Now, you can also tell the schemes from previous generations where a landscape architect has been involved, and it's much more positive. But it's completely different now. The landscape architect is much more a part of the team from the very beginning. So you have your architect, you'll have your engineers that'll be involved, and the landscape architect. And it's very important that everybody's involved.
You mentioned green infrastructure, and SuDS plays a big part into that. Do you feel that SuDS is a constraint, or do you believe it's an opportunity?
Oh, it's an essential part. It's certainly not a constraint. Because at the end of the day, drainage has to be thought about. Drainage has to be treated very responsibly. Sure, look at what's happening around for the last month. it hasn't stopped raining, you know, and even where we live in Ireland, like you would think that at this stage we'd all be well used to the rain and we'd all be able to well able to cope with it all. But still, there's always times where there is going to be an awful lot of rain, and we have to learn to deal with it. So SuDS is us being responsible. It's been around for 20 years. It's not new. No. We've been listening about it for so long. I even was at a conference 2 weeks ago, and it was about SuDS and about getting people to be more responsible. The big issue you have with SuDS is getting everybody to be team players, and for people to understand, SuDS it's not a constraint. Is it an opportunity? Yes, it is. But with that opportunity for SuDS, people need to start to shift their view of what landscape should look like. And we have to start getting a little bit more comfortable with naturalistic landscapes and having ponds and having water open and people learning that risk is okay. As in, if there's a little bit of water sitting there, the whole community are not all of a sudden going to drown in that little bit of water, and that everybody learns to live with those situations.
Yeah, we have definitely quite a few new lakes and ponds around us after all that rainfall.
Yeah, and if you lived in the Netherlands, like you could have a new house and you would be backing onto a dike and it could be full up to the top with water and there'll be no fence there, and everybody learns to live with it and everybody respects it and everybody treats it the way it should be, and we have to learn to do that here as well.
I suppose it can become a constraint as well if it's not thought of at the beginning, and when you have to retrofit it, SuDS as well is really important to get right from the very beginning of a project.
There's no excuse for it not being done at the beginning of the project nowadays, because every council has strategies on water, on green infrastructure, on how it should be done, and if a team is put together properly now, there's no reason why it shouldn't be done properly. The big problem you have is that these applications are put in for planning, and there could be a team, but they're only looking at creating the pretty picture. They're not actually thinking about the end result and how the mechanics of it all works together.
And just for anybody listening who maybe hasn't heard of SuDS before, it's really about kind of slowing, storing and filtering water on a development.
To be honest, one of the first things it's about is filtering water. So like when the water falls, it's first port of call. And the first place that it should really hit is, say if it's on the pavement or the roadway, is it filters down through and it stops things like oil and grit and cigarette butts and rubbish all going down into drainage systems and polluting rivers and polluting waterways. So it's essential. And permeable paving, we can't use enough of it.
Do you believe developers are planning for today's climate or a future climate?
Future climates, but they're always planning for future climates, because all of these attenuation areas or attenuation basements and all of these things, they're planning for that 100-year storm, or that, which seems to be getting shorter and shorter. But they're planning for all of those things all the time. I think one of the biggest problems that the developers have is that 5 years down the road, the homeowner doesn't know how to look after the hydropave. Or the council has all these strategies, but they don't want to take on streetscapes that use hydropave. So they're having to create shifts in that now.
Yeah, it's a bit of a culture change.
It's a bit of a contradiction as well. Yeah, but people need to get past the whole thing, well, I don't really want to have to maintain anything. Life doesn't work that way.
No. So you work on quite a few LEED projects, isn't that correct?
We've worked on LEED projects in the past. They come in every so often. We work on all sorts of projects. But we would work on some LEED projects, yeah.
So LEED is a global scoring matrix?
Yeah. So they get certain scores for certain achievements. Like, for instance, if there's paved areas, we would be using silver because then it keeps down the heat. One of the big things from the landscape perspective for LEED for us is that no plant is planted that's going to need irrigation 2 years into the project, after 2 years, or that the maintenance, there should be no irrigation systems, that kind of thing.
And that's the entire development then is scored as well. So it's everything from even energy performance to indoor quality, environmental quality, etc.
Yeah, from what toilet they fit.
Yes.
Everything is into this scoreboard. And there'll be a separate consultant involved, and they do the scoring, and then they'll send you the questions. And as I said, it's normally, they will ask us, what paving are you using, what square meterage is paved, what square meterage wasn't paved beforehand. Now, there's other systems of these different types of scorings that we're having to look at now, like net biodiversity gain. So a lot of developers are having to go down the road of showing that, your development, say whatever it was before you started, that you're able to match it when you're finished.
And is that biodiversity net gain, is that 10% uplift from so when the site's developed, there's a 10% uplift in nature or biodiversity
if you're doing
once
well.
it's finished?
Yeah. If you're doing well, yeah, but not always. Sometimes what happens is they'll have a system where you can work it out, and if you can't meet a certain score, then you have to give a contribution to the council,
Yes.
or you have to plant more trees, or you have to do something in compensation.
And is that 10% hard to achieve then, you're saying?
Oh, yeah, it's very hard. Yeah, very hard. Because, well, it depends on the site that you're starting with. If you're starting with a brownfield site, then not so hard. If you're starting with a greenfield site, all of a sudden you've lost, and some of these solutions, like, say, green roofs, blue roofs, they're hard to achieve because sometimes they're very costly to install.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes it hard.
Okay.
And also the concept of the maintenance, or it'd be lovely to be able to put ponds in everywhere, but ponds don't hold as much water as people think either, so it's hard to achieve all of these sort of strategies that would give you better net biodiversity gain.
And then from your perspective, do you believe that these types of frameworks make for better landscape design, or do sometimes they come across as tick box exercises?
I think it depends on the development, and I think it depends on how the development is going to work in the future and who's going to look after it. All of these things are fantastic, right? I think we have to be working with green infrastructure. I think we should be having much more natural landscapes in and around, but you also have to have usable space. Kids still need to be outside on a housing development and kick a ball around, right? I think some of the biggest problems you have on some of these schemes is we should start planting better trees. Right? If you planted better trees straight away, you're into a better environment for people to live in. Okay, so it's not about creating all these wildflower meadows and the bulbs and all of this. They're all great. You know what I mean?
Pretty.
They look great for a year.
Yeah.
But it's about 20 years' time, 50 years' time down the road. And, the sad fact of it is that most urban trees, they have a lifespan, and it's not really more than possibly 70 years, and then you're having to change them again, if that. It probably even isn't even as long as that. So sustainability, green infrastructure, yes, we have to do it. People need to start opening their minds to it and changing their expectations of what they think the council or public services should supply in terms of open space.
Yeah, very interesting points. I suppose what's great about these frameworks is that sustainability is moving from intention to verification now, which is great.
Yeah, they want it. The councils are really driving it, and they should be driving it, and they're making people actually do it. And developers they're kind of stuck in a bit of a funny one at the moment. Some of them are really, yes, we want to do this, and they're coming across, they want to have all these environment things, and there sometimes can be a bit of a disconnect to the guy on the ground. So the man in head office says we're going to be all green and sustainable, but the man putting in the development, he's kind of doing it the same way as he's always done it, and he finds it hard to kind of get his head around that this needs to change, and we need to spend more money on the planting and and the green open spaces.
Let's talk about that. So at planning stage, schemes feel aspirational and integrated, and then construction happens and there's a cost review. When value engineering happens, what is usually the first casualty?
Well, there's a couple of things. You have to go back a few steps there before you start talking about value engineering. So you have planning and everything is very inspirational and looks beautiful, and it's a lovely green picture that goes into the council, and everybody says, yes, please, we'll have that. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. And then what can happen is the developer will change their landscape architect, or they might change their architect as well. They could even change the civil engineer. And then the construction phase drawings start to happen. And then people start to realise, actually, this isn't possible. So that is a big problem, right? So you have a beautiful picture that's done for planning, and maybe all of the services. I mean, do you know how many services people have going into their houses? Like
A lot.
TV, internet, EV chargers, electricity, water, and all of those things are all going in through the front door, right? And then you have houses, and all the houses are getting closer together. So where are you meant to put street trees? Where are you meant to do, so all of a sudden you've got this vast area of paved areas, which Tobmore are obviously delighted about, outside the front of the buildings, but they also want the landscape to look good, which Tobmore want as well, So all of a sudden that green pretty picture doesn't happen. Because the green pretty picture would require that you'd have big areas where you have to put in constructed tree pits and things like that, and they're so expensive. So before you even get to the whole value engineering part, you have a big problem with you've changed consultant. All of a sudden there's more services. Now there's not enough space to put everything in that you said you were going to do at planning. So now what happens? The house has to stay the same. Outside starts to get cut. And there's where the big problems happen.
Okay, so when cost becomes the starting point, then the design language shifts?
Well, the design language shifts because they haven't necessarily always thought about all the services that have to go in. And then when they realise that this, the cost of, it's now costing more to install whatever it is that they were going to install, and now they do a review of the paving materials. So the design intent can stay the same, as in you can still have a beautiful plaza, but all of a sudden we've gone from using Artro back to Podesta. That's what happens.
So changing those things impacts the long-term performance as well, then it's not just the aesthetics.
Changing designers halfway through a project is very hard, because if you haven't been the designer that's been involved from the very start, you don't understand what was the design ethos, the design process. You don't know what their thinking was behind it all. Now, you have to remember, even with that when you go to planning, yes, a civil engineer or a landscape architect might be involved from the beginning, but they're not there from the very start of the seed being sown. Okay, so a lot of the time the architect is the person who's laying out the housing or laying out the buildings and laying out the pathways, and then the landscape architect and the engineer is brought in, and they're allowed to make comment, and then they go through the design process, and planning takes place. And then sometimes they change the developer, then sometimes they change who the design team are. And if you are introduced at that point, it's very hard for you to understand what has happened in the past. Why did you get to this point? Was there a bigger budget? Was there, what has led to the design being the way it is? But to be honest, when something is done at planning, there is a QS in the background checking things at some point, doing his sums, okay? Or her sums, doing their sums. And they have budgets and ideas before it gets to detailed design stage. And so that is then communicated over, so it can be challenging.
And why do you think it is still so difficult for landscape architects then to get involved at those very, very early stages, right at the beginning?
I suppose a lot of developers, they don't feel that it's necessary. A lot of developers, the architects, they don't feel it's necessary. They want to get their housing units in. They want to be able to get the figures right. They want to make sure it's going to work for them financially before some landscape architect comes along and starts wanting to colour everything in green. Okay? So a housing development has to have 15% public open space. Okay? They need to make sure that they get 85% of that land totally covered in the instance of housing, covered in houses, for them to be able to make their money. So they don't want a landscape architect coming anywhere near them, because we just want everything to be green and lovely, and
And when landscape comes in late, then what are the consequences?
Well, you're left with the scraps, which is very frustrating. Listen, it has changed so much. When we started in this, when I started over 25 years ago, the landscape architect was the very last thought. They certainly weren't involved in planning. You got to the point where they were near the end of the houses, and the next thing, I'd get a phone call from Tobmore. Would you go around to that development there? There's 100 houses. Would you tell them what to put on the driveway? And there wouldn't be a tree in sight, and then when they would plant trees, there'd be very few trees, and the soil would be bad, and there was, no rules, or no play, no nothing. Nowadays, councils have rules. It's great. and everybody has to follow them. So sometimes landscape architects come in a bit later, but in more cases now, they're involved much more earlier on.
That's great to see. Would you say that landscape is still treated as compliance rather than strategy?
No, it's not well, everything's got compliance attached to it. So whenever you get a planning application, whether you're building an industrial area or a housing development, there'll be a big list of compliant elements that everybody has to follow, right? So it's compliant, okay? But it's still a big strategy that they have to follow. And it's changing. It's a strategy from the council's point of view and the planning department's point of view. From the developer's point of view, it's becoming a strategy from a marketing perspective, from the team building the development. It's a compliance issue.
Okay. We hear the term landscape-led quite a lot. What does that mean in practice?
I wouldn't know. Don't see it very often. Landscape-led. It means that they've, the landscape has taken up a huge part of what their overall strategy. I think, to be honest, it's a very nice sort of buzz term to make people think that, yes, we want this to be in a beautiful landscape, and it's going to be a big part of this development, and we want it to be great, and it's going to be a important aspect of the development and on our design strategy. But the reality, yeah.
So really it's about landscape shaping decisions rather than decorating them.
Oh, yeah. But to be honest, landscape led can be because the actual shape of the landscape dictates how something happens. I don't think there's any flat sites left.
No.
Not a thing. Everything has.
We heard that before, yeah. No flat sites.
Yeah. So it is, from that perspective, it is landscape led. An example of the Giant's Causeway Visitor Centre, that's a landscape led project. I mean, the building fits into the landscape. You don't even see it. It's amazing. Yeah. It's amazing. So that's landscape led. The average housing development, the only way it's landscape led is if it's the level changes are so much, you have to put retaining walls in everywhere, and it's dictated how the whole thing is laid out.
Okay. So then for anyone listening today, what would you say is the key takeaway?
Takeaway, well, we'll just keep fighting the good fight there to make sure we get lots of trees planted and beautiful landscapes for people to live in. It's very important for people to have, I was saying to you before, when we started talking, everybody should start thinking about the 330-300. It's hugely important. We need to be able to, if COVID didn't teach you this, I don't know what could teach anybody this. You need to be able to look out your window and be surrounded by a beautiful space. And whether that's just simply by having grass and trees, doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. That's all we need.
So it's not about projects being landscape led as such, it's about landscape being embedded from day one.
Yeah, it's so important. Yeah. You can't just land a building somewhere, it looks like it's landed from space and nothing else happens. People, there's a whole thing about genus loci. People are affected by their surroundings. As soon as you step outside the building, there is a feeling, an emotion that you have, and half the time people don't even realise they have that emotion, but you would if you were standing in the middle of a black car park with railings around it, no green, no trees, rubbish everywhere. How do you feel, right? You stand in the middle of a car park where they've nicely marked out car parking bays, some trees, hedging, a beautiful surrounding. How do you feel? And that's just in a car park. So there's a big difference.
Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for that. Going to finish off with our usual little game of this or that. Are you happy enough to take part in that?
I don't know, I'll tell you after.
Do you know the rules okay?
Yeah, I just have to answer.
Say the first thing that comes into your head.
That's scary.
The choices I give you.
Not allowed to swear?
No, definitely not. Okay. Public realm or private garden?
Public realm.
I knew you were going to say that. Native planting or architectural schemes?
Don't answer that because it could be either one. Depends on the situation.
A blank canvas site or complex constrained site?
Complex constrained site.
Everybody seems to choose that. Is it just
who wants a blank site?
it's
got no personality.
Okay. Interesting. Mountains or coastline?
Depends on what activity I'm doing. Am I swimming or cycling? Okay.
Oh. What do you think?
Oh, mountains are mountains.
Mountains. Okay. And then final one, cycling or skiing?
Cycling.
Cycling. You did the Majorca
225. Yeah.
I don't know how you did that. It's amazing.
Kept going.
And heat as well. It was,
It's okay. I love the
no,
heat.
it's great. Well, thank you so much, Jane. I really did enjoy that one.
Oh, good.
There's so much in here for specifiers, developers and contractors alike, especially that reminder that landscape isn't a finishing touch. It is infrastructure, it's resilience, and it's long-term value. We'll share links to Jane's work in the episode notes. If this discussion sparked a thought for you or even a bit of debate, we would love to hear from you. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.